Great. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the ONTPD and TCAN virtual job search series. A few reminders for both today's session and the future before we get started. Today's session will be recorded and sent out to all of those who have registered. If you have not done so already, we ask that you do register for this session and other upcoming sessions. You can do that either by scanning the QR code here on the screen or just click the link below. We do so much appreciate everyone submitting questions. We will make sure that we go through a lot of these questions today during the session. And also as a reminder, both the chat text and the job search series handbook and resource guide will be sent out to everybody who completes the post-session evaluation. We will send out the QR code for the evaluation survey intermittently through the presentation, and we will also put the survey link in the chat. So if you could do us a favor and complete that evaluation, and then we will get you all of these great materials. And then as a reminder, Zoom links for the upcoming sessions will be sent out the week of that session. And so as we get started this evening, I just want to welcome you to the academic medicine webinar and question session. We are really excited that you're here joining us this evening. We today have a didactic portion that we are going to go through for about the first half of the session, and then we're going to dedicate the second half of the session to some Q&A time. I am Morgan Hill. I am your moderator for the day. I did all of my training at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and I am currently at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. I am one of the program directors of the fellowship, and I'm very interested in all things resuscitation and medical education. And then to get us started today, we have a wonderful didactic speaker. Dr. Robert Anger is here with us today. Robert is from Chicago. He did both his residency and his fellowship at Tufts, and he is currently an associate professor at NYU School of Medicine, and he is the program director of the Neonatal Perinatal Medicine Fellowship there, practicing in an academic setting. His interests are also education, both postgraduate and faculty development, as well as quality improvement and point of care ultrasound. So Robert is going to get us started for the day. And again, thank you for being here to talk to us.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay. Everyone can see my screen? Are my slides up?
Looks good.
Yep, you're
Great.
good.
Excellent. Okay, great. Well, I'm excited to talk to everybody about this topic. Of course, program directors are always interested. And then the fellows, of course, are always want to know about what they're going to do regarding their job search, because obviously at the end of your training, you have the next steps to take. So we're going to touch on those subjects today, and I don't have any financial disclosures. The things we're going to talk about, hopefully in our learning objectives, to learn about the process and timeline of applying for an academic job, integrate job availability and geographic considerations into your search, learn to use your network, learn to obtain interviews, prepare, perform, and to follow up to obtain an academic job. Okay, so there's always like a little bit of a back and forth and different considerations about the types of jobs. And so when you complete your fellowship, there's kind of like a dividing point, like you do academics, do you do private practice? And then a big question is, can you kind of go back and forth? And that I think that it is a dividing line, because people do tend to go in one way or the other, and then they stay there for a good period of time. And while I've seen people and know people who do it, it is challenging, and you have to be super motivated and take the right steps to do it. But you have to find the career that suits you. So while you're deciding, you should think about like what it is that you are really interested in. So what are your expectations for academic jobs? Generally, depending on what the typical job is and what your role is going to be, it can vary quite a lot from 8 to 22 weeks. If you're coming in maybe you have an MD PhD and you're a seasoned researcher and you're going to start up a lab, and maybe you even have a grant and you can get more protected time, or if you have a K award. But they go up to 22 weeks, and then even more depending on the particular type of job you have. Generally, an average, it's 3 to 5 calls per month. I mean, that depends so much on the system. Some places, the younger people do more calls. Some people have a night float system, so it varies an awful lot. Vacation, generally 4 weeks or so is, I think, average. You should get some office space because there will be expectations that you're going to be doing academic work. And then research support is really important depending on what your job description is and what it is that's going to be expected of you. And then some academic funds to help pay for all of the things that come along the way for an academician, like going to meetings, in addition to all of your AAP dues and other things, ABP costs that get alarmingly higher as you make your way through training. And then, of course, like the healthcare benefits, things like that, that are like pretty standard. And then you also have to think about like retirement contributions. Even though you're just starting your career, it's always important to think about the other end too. Well, what are the benefits of academic medicine? You probably won't be driving a Rolls Royce around. That's just not the way it works. But on the other hand, certainly job satisfaction is something I think that I find truly rewarding, is the training of fellows. And this is us on one of our retreats. So, I think that like you have to ask yourself, like, what is it that you really want out of life? And then what is it that's going to keep you happy? And for me, it's more having a retreat on a lobster boat in New York Harbor, and I could live without the fancy car. So, what are the different pathways to promotion? It's really different at every institution, but I borrowed this slide from our vice chair, who helps with promotion. But each individual institution does it. But basically, there are three columns. There's assistant professor, associate professor, and then professor. Most places used to automatically kind of you come in and you become an assistant professor. Now sometimes you come in as an instructor and then make it to assistant professor. And then there at NYU and many other places there are different tracks. So there's a clinical track which really has a lower research requirement, and clinical is kind of in the name, clinical assistant professor, et cetera. And then the next row is scholar track. And this is a non-tenure kind of research education track. And these, again, it's also it's assistant professor and then parentheses clinical. Again, that's specific to NYU. And then the tenure track is a kind of traditional. You come in and you have to make tenure in a certain amount of time, or else you have to look to go somewhere else. But most of the fellows jobs, I would say, are in these first two categories, clinical or scholar type jobs. And again, every institution has slightly different tracks and different ways of kind of acknowledging people's achievements. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble advancing the slides. Okay. So the overall timeline to bear in mind, in your second year is the time to kind of start thinking about getting yourself ready. So in the first half from July to December, you want to think about career planning, learning opportunities, talk with the younger faculty, and then research useful job resources. And then the second half of your second year, you should start getting the paperwork ready, like updating your CV, show it to your mentor, make sure that they've kind of looked it over, prepare a cover letter if you kind of know what you're looking for or have some places that you're going to target. It's always great to network. And if you are able to go to one of the big meetings in your second year, then you can get a leg up and you can meet people and find out what kinds of job opportunities might be available that you're interested in. And then it's a good time to just research potential practices or programs that you may be interested in. Okay, the third year is kind of when things are really happening. In July, you should really have a list of programs. You should meet with your program director. Your CV should be updated, cover letters, potential programs. And then in November, start narrowing down your options, send CVs and cover letters. and then you should be securing interviews. By January, you should really be well into your interview season. Some people are doing it even earlier, like December. And then you'll may get called back for a second interview. You will likely get called to do a job talk, which is a research type presentation. And then towards the end of winter, you'll kind of complete contract negotiation, sign your contract, work on credentialing, preparing to move, and then moving and starting your new job. Yay, graduation. Okay, so this is a famous New Yorker cartoon that shows New York. This is Manhattan, and then this is how they see the rest of the country across the Hudson River. There's Jersey, and then there's everything else. And I say this not as a provincial New Yorker, but as someone to point out that like we really, really see what's around us, both geographically and in terms of like NICU type, like what level NICU you're in, as like the whole world. And so this is kind of a call to say like take a step back and look, hey, there's a lot of different places out there, a lot of different options. And being in the one place that you're at, you kind of get some blinders on. So there are 1,424 NICUs in the US. This data was from last year. And so that's a lot of NICUs. How do they break down? Only 11% of them are level 4 ICUs. 49% of them are level 3s, and 40% are level 2s. And this is the regional distribution. And I think that's really telling. So it's like, if you think, if every single person that went through a neonatology fellowship wanted to get a level 4 ICU academic job, there simply wouldn't be enough jobs for them. So there are plenty of opportunities all across the board. You just need to decide which one is for you. So here is again the type of hospital with NICUs. Typically, it's academic medical centers. There are a lot of community hospitals that these are the level 4s, but the most of the NICUs you see here, 1,112, are in community settings. And so like the vast majority of NICUs are not academic medical centers. So what are the different elements of an academic job? Of course, there's research, teaching, clinical, and then administrative work. So let's talk about the research. And this is really the most important element of your application to an academic center. This is what they will be most interested when they're deciding whether to interview and then on the hiring process. If what you're doing is applying for a research type position. And so you have to ask yourself some basic questions, like, do you want to continue to do research within your current research topic? What experience do you have that could lead to success? Do you have an advanced degree in an area where you'd like to continue researching and you're not going to need additional training and you can seamlessly transfer to this new job? Or will you need something else like a PhD, an MPH, an MHPE, or some other QI training? Are you dedicated to a particular research area, or are you willing to shift? And then did your research in your fellowship generate some questions that you want to answer, that you want to continue? Did you learn some skills that you can use at other institutions? It's much, much better to build on what you already know than to start something new, unless that's absolutely necessary. That's what you want to do, then go for it. So if you're going to shift your research focus, then you have to think about these things like, well, what area are you interested in? Is it a totally different field, or is it like I'm doing bench research? I just want to do something along different lines. And then what resources do you need? You have to think that through because different institutions provide different levels of support. And then again, can you use your skills or do you need to learn new ones? And then what resources are necessary for you to be successful in a different institution? And this is a very difficult subject because it's hard to know what's going to make you successful. But certainly having a division director who's supportive, and then the material resources you need and the intellectual resources you need to carry out whatever it is you're doing, really, I think, are what makes it possible. And then mentorship is extremely important. So if there are people there who have been successful doing the type of research that you are interested in, and they'll serve as role models and mentors for you, again, that's a big marker for success. And then, of course, what kind of protected time and funding will you need to be successful? So important things are personal factors like your own research track record. What kind of work have you done? How successful have you been? What is the likelihood that you're going to get into become independent? And that depends on what kind of training you've had. what kind of projects have you participated in? Have you had leadership roles in those projects, or are you more just doing like a subset of that? And then, of course, what kind of publications have you garnered? And then certainly if you've gotten any grants, those are huge pluses. So potential for independence is something that is really important. A question you may ask yourself is how much of the work that you want to do can really be done elsewhere. If you're working in a lab that has a lot of very specialized, expensive equipment, you may not be able to replicate that somewhere else, or you may be able to collaborate with them and do parts at one institution and other parts at another. So it really depends on a lot of factors, but it's extremely important to think it through as you're going out into the job market. And then what kind of support is available for new faculty? Are there mentors? Do you have people that you can talk to that will help you kind of make decisions about really what you want, how you want to spend your non-clinical time? Those are the things that I think tend to make people successful. And then what is the research environment like? Is it going to support the kind of work that you want to do? Do they have a lot of people doing that type of work, or would you be the only one? And then if there's a lab, is it within the division? Is it outside the division? How invested are they going to be in your success? There may be an institute there, and they may have a certain type of funding. Maybe it's supported by grants that are time limited. Maybe it's supported by an endowment, in which case it'll go on indefinitely. And then, how dedicated are they to new faculty? There might be things that are really important, like shared facilities that you could use, like animal facilities, tissue culture, microscopy, genetics core, et cetera, et cetera. And then statistical support is really important for clinical research. So is that available, or is that something you have to go outside to get, or depend on yourself? And then grant writing support is also really important, because on the path to independence, certainly getting some grants is key to that. So even if you're not going to do a big part of your job as research, teaching is 100% going to be a big part of your job in an academic type job. So this is something you really need to like doing. Do you like teaching residents, fellows, medical students? And then how much teaching do you want to do as part of your permanent job? Do if this is something you're interested in, you should really seek out opportunities to teach and interact with residents and medical students. You should It's a good idea to volunteer to give resident or medical student talks. You can get involved with developing curriculum. And you can do education research projects as a way to kind of learn more about it, to kind of build your own skill set, and then also demonstrate to your potential employers that this is something that will make you, an asset to their program, as somebody who's going to help out with these things or work on these things. You can become a sim expert and get some extra training in simulation. And then even just administrative things like program administration, if you're interested in that, working on resident recruitment. Sometimes programs will allow you to do that. And then using objective data, I think, is also good. So you can go back and look at the residents' evaluations of you, or the medical students. Most places provide those to you. And you can see, it's like, you may get one or two that are off, but in general, it's like, do people respond well to your teaching? You can always improve your teaching. But it's good to take that into account when you're thinking about, this is going to be something that's going to be a part of your life for the entire time you spend your career at an academic center. And it should be something that you are good at and enjoy. So in terms of like your clinical experience, generally your clinical experience should at least match the needs for the job you're seeking. And so, what types of services are covered, and who will you be working with, are really important. What are the teaching expectations? Maybe some places have you do level 2 work. Sometimes you do newborn nursery coverage. And then what are the administrative expectations? So, are you going to be maybe recruited as end up being an associate program director in a NICU? Or are you going to be like running a follow-up clinic? Or, there might be other elements that are going to be asked of you. Those are all things to kind of consider. Maybe you'll augment your work with QI work. I do want to say one thing about the clinical experience matching the type of jobs. Like, some people train at places that don't have ECMO, and then they wonder, can I get a job at an ECMO place? I mean, I will say that it's certainly easier, I think, to get a job at an ECMO place if you already have a lot of ECMO experience. But most institutions will train you on their own ECMO protocols, and then make sure that you have enough experience before they're actually going to let you do that kind of work. So people certainly can do that, but it behooves you to kind of get additional experience if you can. Okay, so visa status may impact your choices depending on your particular situation. In these instances, geographic flexibility can be really helpful. If you go somewhere where there's physician shortages, then your chances of getting that job and maybe a waiver, if that's what you need, are much, much better. I always recommend discussing this with colleagues who've gone through the process, who are like a few years ahead of you, so that you get a sense of what it's like. Always talk to a lawyer to get expert advice on that, someone who specializes in immigration law. Those are really important steps. Okay, geography. I'm just going to run through some things that you should think about and process as you're trying to make a decision about where you might want to live. So, what are your ties to a location? Are you really like tied down because you have family there? Maybe there's a community there that you've been a part of for a long time and you don't want to leave. If you are going to go somewhere else, is that community going to be sufficient and welcoming to you? People think about schools, like where their kids are going to actually be educated, if that's something that there is in their future, or maybe they have kids already. And then, cultural offerings, nightlife, things that are of interest, and then recreational opportunities. Um, what is there to do in your off hours? And, I'll say that, oops. There are lots of great places all over the country. And I showed you that New Yorker picture with like, New York being like very, huge and like the rest of the country being small, but we do tend to get provincial in the area where we are, and we don't think about the other opportunities that exist in all these other amazing places. I think that if you're not particularly tied down to a place or you have a community or relatives elsewhere, it may suit you to seek a job there, and it may be a really great life. This, by the way, on the left is the Alamo in Texas, and just FYI, when I moved this image over, it took up the entire page. So that just I think is like a natural Texas phenomenon. They're big. Okay, so what's important to you? Make a list of needs versus wants, and really think through what are the things that are essential to you. Think about like what research opportunities do you need that will make you successful? And then what are the chances of you building a successful career at that particular institution? Because, somebody might make promises, but then there's no track record. Nobody there has kind of had the career arc that you're interested in. It's possible that the conditions might be right, but you would want to be really sure that you have the resources that you need. Having office space, having how many calls you're going to have, and then what your other kind of hospital duties are, that might make a really big difference. What kind of mentorship is available? That's a really important factor. There may be moonlighting opportunities to do extra work for extra pay, and that's something that can certainly help make your life better. And then what are the housing and living costs like in the place that you're going to? Because it could be that, that really high salary might get eaten up really quickly with rent and other expenses. And then your own debt obviously plays a huge role if you have it. And then you have to think about how you're going to pay it back. And there are certainly ways that you can get help getting it paid back. You can get your loans absolved if you work for a nonprofit and you do the right things. There's like a loan repayment program. There's lots of different things that you can do. It requires the right environment, but it's a consideration. And then, of course, if you have a significant other, it's like you're going to also talk with them really carefully, obviously. Okay, so use your network. I can't say this enough. I feel like it's the kind of single most important factor may be just somebody who knows you or knows your mentor. Personal recommendations just mean a lot. So don't be afraid to use your mentor, your program director, to talk with them and tell them about what you're interested in. Talk to other faculty in your division, other attendings you may know from residency, and then your, of course, friends from residency. You probably have a pretty large network by now of people that you can talk to, and this is like a great time to talk to people. And you may just meet people at meetings that you like and you hang out with, and then you become friendly with them and you build a little community. Recently graduated fellows from your own program can also give you insight in terms of where they are and what it's like there, or what the program where you're at is like. So these are all good resources for you. Okay. So where to look? This is a tough thing. Most of the best jobs are just really not posted. And so again, you really have to use your network. Mentors, division chiefs, and then faculty phone calls and emails play a pretty big role in this. The AAP does have a job website. It's easily searchable. There are some discipline-specific websites. We have neonatology.org. There are physician recruiters. But just be careful about the terms. Like if you do end up talking to one, they may be sharing your information and your CV without your permission or doing other things like that. So just make sure that you know what you're getting yourself into. And okay, so now you've identified all your potential employers and you sent your CVs and cover letters, and now you're going to schedule an interview. Well, it's important just to be flexible. Remember, like these are your potential employers, but you also don't want to cause disruption at your home institution. So do your best to try to do your interviews when you don't have to make call switches or miss anything, obviously. But your institution should also be flexible with you and understand that this is really important. You need to find a job. Arrive ahead of time, and ideally not post call. We all know that we take call, but to come post call to an interview, you're not at your best. You can't possibly function ideally, and it's just not a great situation. You're not going to put your best foot forward. So some institutions may reimburse you for your interview expenses and others may not. So if they will, they'll tell you. You can always ask. But I would recommend talking to the admin staff about the process and don't bother to the division chiefs about this because the admin staff will tell you whatever's going to be reimbursed or not. But it's not something to just like bug the chief about. But if you do bug the administrative staff, they'll probably tell the chief. So just be aware. It's like not unreasonable to ask, but it can't hurt. And then again, coordinate this really carefully with your co-fellows and your program director to make sure you minimize the impact on your program. All right, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about the different types of interviews. So a lot of people do like a first interview virtually, so especially if you're going out of town somewhere, so you don't have to fly. But I recommend taking these very seriously. Just find out if you can ahead of time who you're going to be meeting, just like an in-person interview to do your homework. And make sure that you are ready to go. You should be dressed and in professional attire, like it's an in-person interview, because this is somebody's first impression of you, and I think it denotes respect if you are professionally dressed and present yourself in the best possible way. Okay, so in-person interviews. You guys have been through a bunch of interviews already, but this is faculty interviewing. So it's good to know who you're going to meet. Many places will have you meet all of the attendings because you're going to interact with these people a lot over the course of your career there, or however long you stay. And then they may have you meet with other attendings who interact frequently with your subspecialty. So if you have like an interest in cardiac care, they may have you meet with people who are working in the cardiac ICU. You may meet with the department chair. You may meet with a vice president or C-suite executive. There may be institute leaders within the organization if there happens to be overlap with what you're anticipating doing at the organization. And then you may arrange meetings with research collaboration or potential mentors. The last type is a follow-up interview or research presentation. So generally, you're not going to be asked to do a research presentation on your initial interview. It'll usually be the second time you come back. They'll say, why don't you come back and give us a research talk? Okay, so preparing for the interview, do your homework. Make sure that you've looked through all of if you know the people who you're going to interview with, it's a great idea to just look and see who they are, look and see what their positions are, look at their most recent publications, just know who you're going to be talking to. Always plan to be early. And then also see like what they may be looking for in their faculty member. You can look and see what everyone does, and you can see maybe there's a gap in this or that area, and then you can think, do I fill that gap? As they're looking for somebody to run their follow-up clinic. I don't see anybody listed for that job. I'm very interested in that, or maybe that was the lead that you got. If you're going to fill a gap that they have, that's going to make you a very attractive candidate to them. And then again, talk to anyone that you know who may have a connection to that institution. Just make sure you review your research projects. You generally know your research better than anyone, but it's really embarrassing to be asked a question about your own research if they've looked at it and you forgot. So just make sure that you're as familiar and fresh as you can be with what the research that you've done. It's fine to take notes to remind yourself of, what was said during the meeting. And then generally, people don't talk about salary in the first interview. If you come back for a second interview and a research talk, and then maybe a third interview to like discuss nuts and bolts, then usually the second or third interview is when salaries come up. So if you're asked for a follow-up interview, again, generally that's the time to discuss compensation. So, of course, during the interview itself, you want to be very professional, be prepared, and then know what you need, and then also know what really isn't negotiable. And there are lots of big academic institutions that kind of have boilerplate contracts, and like you probably won't be able to negotiate extra weeks of vacation. That's unlikely to happen. That's like an institutional policy. Everyone gets X number of weeks, but then there might be stuff that you can negotiate. Listen really carefully to what they say, and you want to make your responses, like thoughtful. And it's okay to ask multiple people similar questions, but don't ask the same question of everyone because people kind of get together and discuss, like, is this somebody we're going to be able to work with? And, you don't want to be seen as like just like kind of repeating the same question over and over. And then importantly, if you have the opportunity, just see if the group seems to like each other and how they interact, because your colleagues in that you work with in your attending job are going to be, you're going to sign out to them, you're going to work side by side with them, and it's just much easier if you're in a group where everybody kind of seems to get along, and you can get a good sense of that in the in-person interview. So your own questions, what are you looking for in a program? Is this program a good match? Is this going to be a good job for you? And what do you want more information on, right? Like if something is kind of publicly available, you may want to confirm that, but don't belabor the point. Is the institution in a growth phase, or are they kind of like stable where they are? Because that'll make a big difference in your own kind of work life. Like if they're growing and adding more beds and they're like deliveries are popping, then you may end up doing more clinical work than you had originally anticipated. Those are good considerations, but growth is also opportunity. And so if you're interested in building a program or building a research lab or doing a whole variety of different things, then that growth can really suit you. Is the division itself growing? Are they adding more people than you? It may be that they're expanding for different reasons. Those are things to pay attention to. And then what about your own personal growth? Like what opportunities are there for you to get additional training, to work in areas that are of interest to you? And then, of course, mentorship and support is really important as you transition to being a faculty member. Like, what kind of support are you given in those first few weeks and then throughout your kind of junior attending years? Of course, schedule and on call, like what's your work life going to be like, how many service weeks, things like that. Those should kind of be described to you at some point during the process. And then the overall expectations, like what kind of role they're looking for, what kind of additional work they need done, and what kind of research that you may fulfill. And then, the big picture is like, how do you fit into the program? Is there some specific niche thing that you're going to do? Are you good, or that you're kind of getting recruited for specifically, or are you just a general like academic person and you're going to do your research and it's going to fit in that way? And again, like how many people are they looking for? Are they just hiring one person? Are they hiring more than one person? That might impact your decisions. So a few things not to do. Don't ever disparage other institutions, especially the one that you're coming from. It really doesn't, I think, reflect well on you. And so if you have opinions, just keep them to yourself. You can be positive and say the things that you're looking for without being negative. Don't like obviously ask inflammatory, condescending questions. And then don't forget to keep in touch and respond in a timely manner to emails, phone calls, etc. And then, of course, do never be inconsiderate of the administrative staff. They have the ears of the division chief, and they are extremely helpful. Generally, want to like help you along, make everything work well. So just think of them as other professionals you're interacting with. Okay, your research presentation. If you are applying for an academic job, generally you will be asked to to give a research presentation. And you should focus on your primary research topic, especially if this is the topic of research that you plan to continue. You want to provide appropriate background for your audience. So if you had a talk that was prepared for a very general group, then these are neonatologists. They know a lot more. You can probably skip some of the basics. Um, think think out and discuss future directions carefully, as this is really what you're proposing to do. Like, what are the unanswered questions that you would like to work towards answering in your new position? And then essentially, really important, review your research carefully with your research mentor to ensure accuracy. And I would recommend going over your research presentation before you actually have your job interview. You want to make sure that it's in like tip-top shape, you know it inside and out, and you can answer all the anticipated questions. And you can also practice your talk with the group at your current institution so that you get all the tough questions answered ahead of time. So in terms of follow-up, you always should have some kind of follow-up communication. Email is preferred. And then, don't leave people hanging and be honest about your intentions. You may have multiple job offers. You may have one at one place, but you're waiting for another. I always think it's just best to be honest about what it is that's happening, and hopefully they'll be honest with you. It's a really small community, as you saw how few academic medical centers there are, and burned bridges are bad for both you and the program. So obviously try to avoid that. Okay, receiving a job offer. Congratulations. You want to first find out how much time you have to decide. Most people will tell you, how much time you have, like whether you can do, like they need an answer in a week or take your time. But that's important for you to know, especially if you're like looking at other jobs and this isn't your number one job. And consider all the different factors that exist in the job, in the particular job that you're getting. So contract negotiation is a totally separate talk. And so I'll leave that there. But one thing that's really important is like the number of clinical months versus protected time, especially in an academic research type job. If there are big expectations for you to be productive in research, but you have a very, very heavy clinical load, it's going to be really, really hard to carry out your plans. So, you want to think that through. So pay resources, there is actually some really good content on last year's private practice conference. So I'll refer you to that. I didn't watch this year's again if they've done it yet, but that one, I thought that had some really good information about it. There is an AAMC faculty salary report that is typically only seen by division chiefs and admins. Other people have told me that they can see it or that they let their fellows see it. It basically goes by region, city, and it tells you at which rank and what's the like range of salary for 25th to 75th percentile and then mean salary. Some places aim for different points within that average. Every institution I've been at has I know that they all have it, but they don't ever actually show it. You can buy it for like $1,000 or something. But anyway, it's not something that's publicly available. I don't know if the other faculty here want to comment on that when this is done, but I never see it. Doximity has some information. Weatherby does. Glassdoor. They all have some like stuff that they do through surveys, but I think it's pretty inaccurate. This is a good thing to talk about with your mentor, and they may be able to help you. Okay, so you've gotten your job, and like I said, follow-up is really important. Of course, you want to make sure you have a medical license where you're going to be, and you want to, of course, apply for the credentials in the hospital clinics where you're going to be working. Don't delay this because it may make your start date impossible. And then you want to start making those research connections that are going to make you successful. Like there should be some overlap. Maybe meet with your collaborators or lab colleagues, et cetera, ahead of time. Okay, I think that's it. It is quarter till. Let me stop sharing. Great. All right, Morgan.
All right. I'm going to take back over. Thank you so much for that wonderful talk. That was absolutely fantastic and a great way to get us started. And now with that, we are going to move on to the faculty panel, and we'll have some time to go through some questions that were pre-submitted. And then definitely if you are here and on and have more questions, we are happy to take them. As we are getting started this evening, I just want to introduce two of our panelists who are joining us and Dr. Engert for this part of the session today. First, we have with us Dr. Stephanie Bork. She is originally from Ontario, and she did both her residency and her fellowship at the University of Colorado. And she remains at Colorado, where currently she is an assistant professor and an associate medical director at Children's Hospital Colorado NICU. She is very interested in family engagement in the NICU. And then we also have Dr. Trent Tipple joining us today. He is from Indiana. He did his residency and his fellowship at Nationwide in Columbus. And he is currently a professor in chief for the section of neonatal perinatal medicine at the University of Oklahoma and Oklahoma Children's Hospital. And his interests are in modifiable factors that modulate the efficacy of endogenous antioxidant responses in prematurely born neonates. So we are very lucky to have all three of these great individuals with us today to go through our questions. And with that, I am going to get us started. So first, we just want to take a little bit more time to talk about kind of first impressions and application season. And so one great question that was submitted was, how do you advertise yourself to academic positions when you went to maybe an unimpressive fellowship? And what do you do to sell yourself?
I'm happy to field that one to start. I think one thing I'd maybe like to understand is what is meant by an unimpressive fellowship. I mean, for me, I always want to understand the person who's reaching out. What are their passions, their motivations, and their journeys? And so oftentimes the steps on our journeys lead us to where we are at any iterative step. And so, somebody coming through their career journey and moving to the point of applying and seeking out their first position, number one, has chosen academia, regardless of their background. And so if they have that interest, understanding why. For me, it's about the cumulative experiences, not just what is acquired as a fellow, but the experiences that really drive the inherent motivation to achieve and the impact one wants to have. And so I think I'm less, I don't want to say completely not interested, but less interested in where one is coming from than where one is trying to go in their career, knowing that we all have different paths and journeys and opportunities to allow us to take those steps forward. And so from the perspective of somebody who's seeking to sell themselves, really what I want to see and what I want to understand is what is the impact you're seeking to make as you've amassed these experiences through your personal life, your professional life, and the journey toward making an impact as a provider to critically ill neonates, and in an academic setting, the other aspects of the career one is seeking to achieve, regardless of background.
Anyone else have anything to add to that question?
I mean, I think that your work during fellowship, should do the talking, right? Like not the esteem of the fellowship. So if and that, I mean, it may be harder because it may be that there aren't as many opportunities at an institution like is described here in this question, in which case you have to be resourceful and productive and do interesting, cool things with what you have. And I think people will recognize that value if they see it. So, if you don't have a lot of resources, but you were able to pull together a really great research project, a prospective study in something that didn't require a lot of money, but you put a lot of work into it and it was a really meaningful research question and you really ran it well. I think that can speak a lot towards your own potential. So it's like what you do with the time that you have available, I think will help you on to the next step.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that from the perspective of what do you do with the opportunities that have been presented to you? Because I think, Robert, as you point out, not everyone has the equal opportunity necessarily. And I'm often more impressed by the person who's taken really a paucity of opportunity and turn it into something impactful through which they can articulate a growth process that helps me understand how I can meet them where they are and continue to help journey with them toward where they're going.
That's great. Thank you both. Kind of moving on a little bit, one of the questions, which I know, Dr. Engert, you spoke to a little bit, but to get into maybe a bit more detail is kind of what should somebody expect from an interview day?
Exhaustion.
I would agree with
That's
that.
yeah.
I think it depends a little bit now that we're interviewing more in this sort of hybrid era of virtual and in-person interviews. I interviewed for faculty positions in a time where everything was in person. So it was a trip, you know, it was a journey across the country. It was figuring out, you know, accommodations and getting yourself there. And then I think the thing that maybe surprised me, and I don't think should have, or won't surprise you now that you've listened to Robert's talk, is the number of people that you are likely to interview with during your time there. The couple of places I interviewed with, I really did interview with every single person on the faculty. And depending on the size of the institution, that may not be feasible for very large faculties, but I think at many places, it is very much expected that you will talk to nearly everybody and really figuring out whether it's a good fit, just like for fellowship. So less so, you know, for medical school and residency, but moving on into faculty positions, it's really are they offering what you are interested in? Are you offering what they're looking for? And is it going to be a good relationship moving forward, both from a clinical perspective, but especially from an academic research and scholarly perspective? And it's tiring. And usually they feed you pretty well.
I think of two things. You should feel welcome. You should feel wanted. And if you don't
Yeah.
feel either of those things, that's a pretty big red flag. That we all suffer to some degree from imposter syndrome. And so by the time you've reached this point in your career, you might feel slightly above blue-green algae on the phylogenetic tree. But you have a lot to offer. And this is the culmination, as I said before, of a lot of your life's journey. And if there isn't a similar level of enthusiasm about this step you're about to embark upon on the other side of the equation, then that should be concerning to you. So you should expect to feel warmly greeted and that people should be happy that you're there.
And that they're recruiting you, you know, like they should be showing up as if they, yeah, exactly. You said, Trent, that they want you to be there.
Yeah, I just want to I totally agree with that. And I want to reiterate, like, also observing how they interact with each other, because I think that's very telling. You can tell people like something about how do they like each other, do they, have friendly relationships, do they kind of standoffish? I think that speaks a lot. And I mean, I think that like that's one of the most important things in terms of like your own happiness and success in a place is whether you have supportive colleagues that they get along with and that you like to work with.
Yeah, I think you certainly shouldn't expect to meet everyone and that they all sing from the same songbook and agree on everything, but can you work professionally and disagree respectfully and remember the reason we're there is our patients? And if you can see those types of traits, that's hard to pick up on, but you get the gestalt. Unfortunately for this generation, not having had the opportunity to go through in-person fellowship interviews, but at least maybe thinking back to residency interviews, and we all had gut feelings about perhaps a place we were enamored with that we got there, and our gut told us something different than our heart. And so, but there are ways to pick up on those subtleties that upon reflection, I think that's an important component on the backside of that is to really thoughtfully reflect back to that significant other, whether that's a spouse or somebody else who's important in your life, because they will also sense your enthusiasm or your lack thereof, and be able to repeat back to you how you felt or how you feel about the experience you went through.
The other two quick things I'll add. One is that I was asked to do some research talks on that first visit. So I think that might be variable depending on if the first visit is virtual or, a shorter interview versus, a longer visit to that institution. And the second thing that I find to be very helpful is not only how do the faculty interact with each other, trying to get a sense of, the contentness of their fellows and their nursing and advanced provider staff, the people that the faculty are working with. That can be challenging to do, but as you're given the opportunity to meet with people throughout the day, trying to sort of suss out whether or not they're collaborative, are there challenging relationships. And then I think the other thing that is always interesting to me is to hear the neonatologist perspective on how they interact with their surgical colleagues.
Right. That's great. On kind of the same note of just interviews and applying, we talked a little bit, and I think did a good job of overall like finding out how jobs are available, using kind of your connections and networking, but specifically for people who maybe have dual interests or dual training, and things like NICU and palliative care. Any suggestions or advice on how to look for jobs there and how to address that during the job search?
I think that should be in your cover letter. What I really want to understand from anybody's engagement with me is where you hope to be. Where are you on your journey, but more importantly, where do you hope to go, and what skill sets have you amassed that you want to utilize? Because the worst possible scenario is to land somewhere where you can't actually use your training and execute something meaningful using something you've sacrificed to achieve. So I think it's very important that that's stated from the outset of the ideal type of position you're looking for, and potentially the type of support. And even if you don't know what type of support that would be, that's where you need to lean on your mentors and others to help you articulate from the perspective that you have at this stage in your career what that may look like.
Great. I'm going to move right along. We are going to kind of shift gears to thinking then about negotiation and contracts. And we recognize, and I think most people recognize, that most academic salaries are set. So advice on what types of things you can potentially negotiate for in your contract.
I think one thing is the support that the division is willing to give you as junior faculty. So whether that be a little bit of statistical support, some PRA support, things that you ultimately will work to get funding for or may come into a job with funding. But if you're not in that position, how can the institution help you be successful to sort of achieve the goals that you are getting hired to do, whether that be independent funding for research, whether that be medical education, quality improvement. So I think that's one thing that can be discussed. Office space, I think, is a hot topic. At least at our institution, there's never enough of it, although then most people seem to work remotely. So I think that's another point of potential discussion of sort of how flexible can the division be with where you're working and how you're sort of spending your off service time.
Sign-on bonus. Be the first thing to say. I experienced a time in my career, not during my own hire, but when a number of people were hired into the division. Half came through a recruitment firm, half came in on their own. The half that came through the recruitment firm had sign-on bonuses, and when the other half found out, they went to the chief and said, "How come they got a sign-on bonus?" And their response was, "They asked." So you don't get what you don't ask for. I try to be a little more transparent around that when I'm doing recruitment. But that's certainly something, your moving expenses, oftentimes that is covered, and there are standards around that, but ensuring that those types of expenses have the opportunity to be covered. And if they are, then how are they included in your compensation calculation? Because it might be actually compensated, put into that first year's compensation calculation as a taxable income. I think what Stephanie said is spot on from the perspective of the skills development that is necessary, whether that's a certificate program, a master's program, or participating. I have a faculty member who's finishing an ethics program in Kansas City. who requested support to be able to acquire that additional skill set. And so those are things that are pretty straightforward. And then if it's program growth and development, then you're working together to identify what is the upfront buy-in time that's necessary to work to establish a program. With whom are you going to work, and at what point do you then need to have, if it's something that's a billable activity that has some sort of funds that will flow back through to help offset that salary expense. But oftentimes you need to front load that as well. And that kind of ties into the FTE part, is really calculating realistically how much time does one need. What I frequently will encounter are requests for an inordinate amount of time for something that doesn't require as much time as one is asking for. So trying to be reasonable, and we all have Popper's mentality, just have a little, please. But I think really having a negotiation around the time and how that time will be spent, because there is a lot less direct line of sight. You alluded to earlier about work from home. And I stress with the faculty, your productivity is measured in your output. And so I'm less concerned about where you have your output than that you have academic metrics of output and contributions to the program. And so I think that's another place that potentially even how your FTE is utilized and what type of flexibility you have. If you have young children or starting a family, or you need to get your kids settled in school, what does that type of flexibility look like for you? And we're in an era where that's much more straightforward to discuss and not taboo. I think maybe 10 years ago, that might have been a very taboo topic.
The other thing I'll add is it may be possible to negotiate what type of clinical job you do. So at many institutions, there may be a level 4 unit, there may be a level 3 delivery hospital, there may be community level 2 hospitals. And so can you negotiate sort of where you spend your clinical time if it's set that you'll do X number of weeks, but you're really interested in resuscitation, then it probably makes sense for you to advocate to be more at the delivery hospital than at the referring unit. And how do you align your academic and scholarly interests with the clinical work that you'll be doing? And can you sort of build on those interests with the patient population or the unit and the environment that you're working in clinically?
I'll add that one thing I've seen is people negotiate is start dates. Like they may not want to start like the day you finish your fellowship, the next day you start your attending job. You might need moving time. You might need, maybe you want to take a vacation that you've never been able to take if you can afford it. So, you won't get paid, and then there's a gap in health insurance potentially. So there are a lot of considerations if you are going to do that. But this is a time when I've known people to negotiate a later start date. Most division chiefs are not excited about that, because if they need someone, they don't want to wait because you're going to be doing, you have to get oriented, and then there's like schedule, they want to put you in the schedule. But I think that is something that I have seen people negotiate, worth considering.
Well, I think I'm glad that you bring that up as well. I've had two faculty now. Well, one who is starting in September, another who started last September, and they started in September because they had a baby during fellowship. They needed to extend their fellowship slightly, and then wanted that time to come and adjust. And the more lead time one has, and I think that's where it was important to really lay out what should that timeline look like during the second year into the third year. Because when I'm calculating the amount of clinical FTE that I need to cover our schedule or add or grow programs, I can already calculate in that I have somebody coming in who's doing 0.82 clinical FTE this year because they're coming in September. And so I can essentially do that fractional math and add that in. And then I know that I have some faculty who are going to be a little more front loaded to cover our schedule for the year, the way things fall out. I do think, and it's not really part of this question, but it is important to understand, how does a division handle FMLA? How do they handle major life events? Are you required to do that clinical effort in a smaller window, or does that actually get applied equally across your FTE? That was something that I would say in the first couple of years that I was in Oklahoma, we were not able to accommodate amortizing that across the FTE. And actually, we moved and hired to be in a position where we can have, last year I had 3 people on maternity leave or paternity leave. And so being able to integrate those things into a schedule and understanding how, as your life evolves, or if we're all one event away from something serious in our lives that might upend what we're able to contribute. And it's always very important I think, to be able to articulate and understand how that might be, how that might be incorporated into your FTE.
And let's just elaborate a little bit more on that. We got into, okay, maybe you can negotiate some FTE, but like, how do you recommend that people get started? I think for a lot of people applying, they don't really even quite understand what is a full-time FTE, what is built in as protected, what can you ask for in protected in terms of protected time. So how do you kind of recommend that people navigate those conversations and negotiate some FTE?
Learn what one equals. So one FTE is what? And then really, and it's timely, and hopefully in the next 6 months or so, there will be a staffing and workload appropriate for neonatologists. I'm part of a multidisciplinary work group of division directors and others across the section, where we will be setting a clinical maximum number of hours that should be incorporated into an FTE, but everything really works from 1 minus. So in our division, that is 1 minus 0.1. So a full clinical FTE is 0.9. Our hospital system made it easy because we are paid by a shift-based model, so it's 2,000 hours per year. And so 1,800 clinical hour equivalents per year would be a full-time clinical position. And so we don't treat every hour equally. So an hour of in-house overnight call is an hour and a half of clinical service credit. And so it ends up being between 1,600 and 1,650 hours of patient-facing, patient-directed time. And then it makes it more straightforward as people are saying, okay, like for my assistant medical directors, they get 0.09 clinical FTE reduction. And so 0.09 is the equivalent of 3 weeks of 5-day service blocks. That also translates into other areas of service as well. And so thinking about, okay, if I'm doing something, how much time do I need for that? The other thing is to ask whether it's possible that do you need to have a 1.0 FTE job? Actually, it's made it more straightforward with the definition that's been given to us. And we were already doing this to some degree before, but I have some faculty who are 0.8. I have some faculty who are 0.5. And so that 10% reduction in clinical time is applied across whatever the total FTE equates to. And so are there opportunities to work at less than 1.0, depending on where one is in their life stage? And so trying to have that type of flexibility built in. But it usually starts from 1 minus, and most places are minus 10% or minus 20%. That's your expected academic time that is not patient facing.
All right. So let's kind of shift the conversation a little bit to promotions. One question was specifically how to ask for a mainly clinical role, but with still an opportunity to be promoted within an academic setting. And so mainly that's, I guess, probably going to be speaking to how does one get promoted in a clinical role.
I'll refer back to that slide that I showed from our own institution that I think has like a nice matrix. And I don't know if all institutions have that kind of like clinical assistant professor, clinical associate that acknowledges the contributions of clinician to the academic environment with teaching on rounds and afternoon talks that are given. That's like meant to acknowledge that. And it's really like really honestly a lower bar in terms of like publication requirements and other academic contributions. So I think just asking about the promotions process at the institution, and then just being honest about what you're looking for. If you don't see yourself doing research and academic inquiry, and they're not looking for someone who's going to be a researcher, they want the 0.9 FTE to somebody to do the work and be there and teach the residents and fellows, then that might be a good mix. But you don't want to go somewhere where the expectations are out of line with what your interests are. So I would just recommend being honest about what it is you're looking for, and then and then you can just ask if there are tracks to be promoted academically based on the type of work that you're interested in doing.
I think I would imagine, at least for our institution, I would imagine others, that information is publicly available. So you can access sort of promotions information on the university or the School of Medicine's website to really understand how that institution thinks about promotion. It's not always super straightforward, but there are actually a lot of resources, I think, available and maybe worthwhile looking into as you're really doing this job search and the interview process so that you end up in a role that you feel like you're going to be successful in and can be promoted in whatever track you're on. But I think that's also something that the people you're interviewing with, and maybe Trent can talk to this a little bit more, that should be a clear expectation from the section head or division chief.
Yeah, I think the thing that has evolved, and so before coming to Oklahoma, I was at University of Alabama at Birmingham, and they had developed a clinician track, and our promotion and tenure process was recently revamped as well with a clinician track, and that's really the default track for most who come in. If there is additional time protected for education related activities, then somebody would be on the clinician educator track. If they are doing a research scientist type of position as a physician scientist, they would be on the clinician scientist track. And so each of those then come with very clear guidelines about what it takes to be promoted. And I actually said on the university promotion or the college promotion and tenure committee as well. And what I'm able to sit down with people and show them is, here are the criteria. And you have to be 5 years at rank to be promoted on the clinician pathway. Here are the areas where you need to be able to demonstrate excellence. Our goal would be that you're doing what you're passionate about and meeting a need that we have. And the byproduct of that will be the currency of promotion. And our annual review will be our once a year time to sit down and see how you're making progress toward that. But it's very clearly articulated with bullet points, which has made it much more straightforward than trying to read between the lines, quote unquote, or having people stuck on the track where the expectation for publications continues to evolve over time. So that the longer it takes for you to be promoted, the more currency you need to be eligible to be promoted, which is where things had devolved to some degree to in this institution. And so it becomes very helpful. And then I can share with individuals that as the person reviewing the packets at the college, I actually have something that looks very similar to the document that they're seeing, where I just have check boxes instead of bullet points to be able to say, yes, do I see evidence of these things? And then be able to talk through it. And so I would anticipate that most institutions have clinician focused tracks because there is an appreciation of, number one, the importance of just the clinician, quote unquote, to the overall success of a training program and a clinical program, especially with the types of volume and acuity that we're seeing. And, hold on a little bit, because as we come out and say that that there should be a maximum number of clinical facing hours that a neonatologist is doing in an academic setting, and anything above that, anything above 1.0 should be compensated at some type of rate because you're doing extra work on top of that. We're suddenly not going to have as many people covering that work as we do, or we're going to have the same number who are going to need to be paid more to do it. And so, ensuring that you can reconcile that against the criteria for promotion and understanding the importance of the clinician to the overall operations. Fortunately, we're at a point in academia where there's an acknowledgement of the important role. So that should not be a barrier to being able to advance academically, as maybe it has been in the past where people got stuck as an assistant professor for 20 years.
That's great. And I think great advice to kind of seek out that information too. As Dr. Borg mentioned, a lot of it, you can kind of find it publicly available and then ask and talk about it during your interviews. And then any maybe special considerations for promotion if someone is potentially starting as an instructor versus maybe an assistant professor on a track?
I'm less familiar with the instructor path, only as much to say that one of the questions you can ask is, can I move paths? Can I move tracks? And so a lot of times my understanding would be that the instructor has something to do with how am I going to move from an instructor to an assistant professor if I have some sort of up and out or some sort of time clock that starts where I need to achieve promotion and or tenure by a certain point. And if I'm unable to do so, then there are consequences for my professional career, i.e., I need to switch tracks or I need to find a new job. And so I'm not familiar, nor have I worked anywhere where people have started on an instructor track, but I have certainly been in situations where people have started on a clinician educator track, let's say, and moved over, or I'm in a position now where I have many people on the clinician educator track who don't have funded GME time. And now the university says they shouldn't be on that track anymore. And so we're moving them over to the clinician track. And so, and the years of service count, the qualifications toward that 5-year promotion, et cetera. So I think if somebody's proposing to start one audit instructor, understand how does that advantage you versus how it advantages them, because all of these decisions should really be made to the benefit of the candidate and not necessarily to the benefit of the institution. I think it's a reasonable ask.
I do think it's really relevant also just to talk about salary, honestly, because all those stratifications are really different in that AAMC average salary. So like there's a, bump between each level. And if you're stuck at one level, I mean, it can hold you back in terms of compensation as well. So it's not, I mean, you should do it for the glory, right? But we all have to live our lives too and pay for them.
Well, it limits the range as a division chief. It limits the range of salary that I can advocate for one. And I have individuals who are at the higher end, let's say as an associate professor. And somebody who's younger, but as a professor, it gives me access to a different, to your point, different reference point as well. And so it is an important consideration. And I think it's important to understand how your chief and how your program is going to promote. If you're doing the work and you're applying yourself and meeting the need, how are they going to support you to successfully achieve promotion within whatever window I told all my faculty, my goal is that you're eligible by 5 years, because that is the soonest time at which you can be promoted. And if there are inevitable barriers, or even understanding, what happens if I have a serious life event, or and I'm on a 10-year clock. I had something like that happen to me early in my career, where I was on an up and out 10-year clock, and I had an earlier review than a 5-year review or a 7-year review, and ended up needing to request an extension of my 10-year clock by a year to account for the time that I missed due to a health situation. And so I think it's also important to understand. And the good thing is you're dealing with human beings. And for the most part, people are good and they're going to want to be supportive.
Great. This is getting into kind of a little more specifically thinking about really, again, the academic medicine role. And we talked a bit about maybe potentially taking a primarily clinical job. But one question specifically was if you are hired kind of for 100% clinical for an academic position, what maybe are some of the non-clinical expectations if you are 100% clinical?
I think it probably depends a lot on the group and what the needs might be. So it could be that you have a responsibility to run M&M conference, or that you are part of the policy and review guideline committee for the hospital, or you sit on the pharmacy and therapeutics, the P&T committee for the hospital. There's lots of those positions that don't necessarily require or don't necessarily come with time or funding, but are necessary for the advancement and the success of the group as a whole. And at least in our institution, those are some of the positions that some of our clinical faculty hold, in addition to their really important clinical job, and then teaching in whatever capacity that may happen during their service time. There's no end of committees that the hospital will want somebody from neonatology to sit on.
I was going to add that teaching is always going to, you mentioned it, and teaching is always going to be a component in an academic center by nature of what it is. So even if it's not fellows, maybe it's residents, or it might be family practice, like some kind of education. So, if you're going to be in an academic center, it's invariable that you're going to be doing some kind of teaching. So you should like that.
I think there are other opportunities to think about involvement with, let's say, medical school admissions or residency evaluation, or just many different places where you can explore and be curious around ways that you can take your experience and apply it for others who are coming along behind. And that is one of the benefits of living in the academic setting, is being able to explore those opportunities. And I think for my faculty, one of the things we're working on is that everyone contributes to QI. And it's not just saying I'm on a committee, but what are you actually doing and bringing and helping to make us all better? And so there would be an expectation with that 200 hours a year. Again, if you go back to a 2,000 hour a year model, with that 200 hours per year that you're doing something meaningful in that space, that you're attending section meetings, that you're actively engaged and visible as a member and a colleague, and not coming, doing your clinical time, and then closing the door and leaving and not being engaged. Because it really does take everyone contributing in their own way for us all to be at our best.
We had another recently submitted question, actually, kind of about 100% clinical position at an academic setting. And the question really was specifically related to how to make yourself a competitive applicant if truly you just want to be 100% clinical. Any advice maybe for those individuals?
I think understanding whether there's a palate, is that a palatable need? I mean, or something that I would want to understand. Even what is the perception of 100% clinical? I mean, is that like legitimately showing up, doing service and leading? Because I would be concerned that how are you going to engage in the process improvement, quality improvement, and other activities as a colleague within the section? Because that camaraderie is extremely important, as is, I mean, I've been very gratified to hire people from around the country who are bringing their unique perspectives as well to help make us better. And so there's an important contributory opportunity to be able, and it might not be what one perceives as being something outside of coming to work, seeing patients and leaving. I also think it would be very hard to have a job where that's all you do. Depending on the setting in which you practice, this is a very hard job. It's very emotionally draining, and having the chance to step away, but continue to be engaged professionally. For me, I can't imagine a scenario where I wouldn't have that as part of my day, also part of my year.
And I think a good way to also demonstrate that is to join some extra committees and do some other work along those lines during your fellowship, so that, you know, you have a track record of being like a good community member, right? Like if you're on, you know, the P&T committee, you can join those. They're like available to you. And that's something you can talk about. Look, I learned a lot about policy development and like, or, you know, whatever it is that you're interested in, to kind of participate in those. I think it really, again, bolsters your application. Do some great QI projects and show that you're interested in like in that kind of a thing. Those are just some examples.
Great. And then one of the last questions for the day, I think we kind of talked about already, but really getting back to that question of what's typically considered in 1.0 FTE and kind of how much variety is there in clinical responsibilities.
I think there's a lot of variety. I mean, I think the work that's being done at the national level, as Trent alluded to earlier, will hopefully help clarify that across sort of neonatology academic positions at the national level. But I think there is a lot of differences just depending on the institution that you're working at. So is there a delivery service? Is there a need for fetal care consults? Is there follow-up? Is there a step down unit? All of these things that I think go into an academic section that may look different in each place. And potentially they're looking for someone that, the fetal care center is growing and they need another person to do those consults, or they need a new liaison to the cardiology service or the cardiac ICU. And trying to really identify that gap. And if that's something that you can fill, I think really sort of speaking to that, or asking, and ahead of time, ahead of the interview, asking what are the gaps? What do people need at this institution, and how might I serve that? I think is a really proactive way of coming in.
I think, asking about what is shared, what are the requirements for everyone? This was alluded to earlier with respect to call, that perhaps it becomes a young person's gambit. And I would argue that we all have various times in our life where an in-house requirement is more onerous. And I'm an empty nester now, so it's I miss far less when I'm on call in-house, but I'm also 50 and I don't recover quite as quickly. And so, having that type of flexibility, but at the same time, the example I'll use is prenatal consults in the high risk clinic. I had the same 5 to 7 people who would reliably sign up to do them. There was no credit given for it. So we ended up as a faculty assigning a credit for that amount of time and then dividing that responsibility equally amongst everyone. And if you traded it for something different or you chose, to not do it, it wasn't because it wasn't an expectation of part of your base FTE that everyone contributes equally. Because the minute you start saying, I don't do that, you're saying that somebody else has to. And so understanding as the new person coming in, what parts of the practice am I going to be contributing to? Because if you're talking to me, I would be making it clear that you're going to be doing 2 weeks. You're going to be the person on during those 2 weeks to get the prenatal consultation. But you have the option of swapping that into a weekend call or doing something different with that FTE. And so, I hope that we as a field are evolving in a way that becomes more flexible for people to meet people where they are in their lives and in the journey with their families, et cetera. But like I said, I would be wary of any place that says, well, you're the new person. So, you know, we did our dues. So it's now your time to do it too. I hope that we've evolved as a field away from that.
Yeah. And really, I think we have covered most of our submitted questions. And again, I just want to give a huge, huge thank you to Dr. Anger, Dr. Tipple, and Dr. Bork for joining us and kind of sharing all of their wisdom and advice with us. And thank everybody here for joining us tonight too. And we would love if you could evaluate us again. You can scan the QR code there. And as a reminder, we will send out a recorded link of the session once it's available. And then if you can, please just include your email at the end of the post-session evaluation, and then we'll send you all of those resources. And as a reminder, our upcoming session in about interviewing tips and tricks is in July. So on July 11th, from 7 to 8:30 p.m. Central, we will be doing that interviewing tips and tricks session. And then as you can see, there are a few more sessions that are coming up that you have to look forward to, and we will send out dates once we have those confirmed. So again, I just want to thank everybody, and I hope everybody has a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Nicole.